This week, we welcome Jess Burns, Senior Analyst at Forrester Research, to discuss security succession planning for business resilience. In our second segment, we have some pre-recorded editorials from this year's RSA conference that you won't want to miss. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
Cloud security compliance doesn't have to be complicated. Whether your business is migrating to the cloud or a seasoned cloud service provider, BAR Advisory can help you simplify security and compliance frameworks, including SOC, ISO, and HITRUST. As an extension of your team, BAR specialists will put your people first and empower them with the knowledge and tools needed to stay secure and compliant at every stage of your business growth. Learn how BAR can help your company build trust with consumers and become cyber resilient at securityweekly.com/BAR Advisory. That's BARR Advisory. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, improve compliance and audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys.
All right, welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode 273, recorded August 15th, 2022. I am not your usual host. I'm standing in for Matt today. And with me is Jason Albuquerque. Hello, Jason.
Hey, Adrian, how you doing? Great to see you. Thanks for jumping in and being the main host today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're thinking, yeah, now you don't have to, right?
You know, we're running 1,000 miles an hour here, so we're all jumping in when we have to, but I appreciate it.
Yep. No, it's I miss doing Business Security Weekly, and really excited about this one today. Also with us, we have Mr. Lee Neely. Hello, Lee.
Happy Monday. Good to be here. Glad I could have a little bit chance to do something different than the usual Monday morning compliance-related stuff.
Yep, absolutely. A few announcements real quick here. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all your new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, which include YouTube and Twitch. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. We've got some good ones there from earlier this year. Our guest for today is Jess Burns, who is a senior analyst at Forrester, serving security and risk professionals. She contributes to Forrester's research, covers the role of the CISO, zero trust, email security, incident response, and crisis management. Some of my favorite topics. All right, Jess, welcome back to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me back. It's great to be here. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you since last year's RSA interview, so glad to be on with you as the guest host tonight.
As some of our listeners may know, I used to be a industry analyst, so I love talking to other industry analysts. I do kind of miss that work, though I still kind of get to do some of that here in the show, and I get to have analysts like you to chat with every now and then.
Yeah, that's great.
So today's topic is security succession planning for business resilience. Bit of a mouthful, but I think you're basically saying, CISOs still come and go. I forget what the average tenure of a CISO is, but it's shorter than other executive level positions. And it takes a long time to hire a CISO. I've got some CISO friends, and I hear horror stories about all the contract redlining and personal insurance, all kinds of stuff they have to do to get the job. So sometimes that role sits open. Is that what we're talking about today?
Well, it can be the CISO role, but I actually really felt it was important to branch it out beyond, the C level, right? Typically, succession planning in an organization is reserved for that C-suite, which would include the CISO in most cases. Although the CISO is an interesting role in that sometimes it is not a direct report of the CEO, but sometimes people only think about it in terms of succession, like, the show, right? Where it's like everyone's vying for that very top position. But what I wanted to do with this research, and I spoke about this at Forrester Security and Risk Forum last year, is take that into all critical roles for the security organization. So we're talking about individual contributors, we're talking about managers, and we're just talking about single points of failure that you've identified through this process of thinking about, what would happen if this person just suddenly left. And, last year when we started to do this research and into this year, the great resignation or the great reshuffle in terms of security was on my mind. So, we noticed that positions were sitting open for longer and longer. And the more those positions were open, the longer they were open, the more vulnerable a company became. And, it's very difficult to fill those positions with the current somewhat self-inflicted skills and staffing shortage. I'm going to be talking about at our forum this year, new non-traditional ways to get more early career folks into the pipeline, because again, that's another issue, I think. But for this succession planning, I wanted to make sure that security leaders thought about it not just for themselves, but for their entire organization. So that's the catalyst for this.
So Jess, do you actually see this going beyond the security team, right? I know as a security professional, you have a lot of touch points throughout the organization, subject matter experts in other business units. In some way, shape, or form, I feel like it's our duty to identify those single points of failures outside of the security team. Maybe there's a liaison in finance or HR or within your services organization that could be critical to the success of the security team. I feel you should branch out beyond just the security team and look throughout the entirety of the organization.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. I mean, I think especially when you're thinking about security champions and folks that have that institutional knowledge, it's really institutional knowledge across the board that you're losing. If someone is taken on a number of different roles and entitlements and they've become your security go-to in finance or HR or, on the shop floor, that's something that you really need to make sure that you're also looking at as well. Good point.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it depends on the culture, I would think, the impact that you would see, from a vacancy there. If you haven't instilled that security's everyone's job type of culture in the organization, like I advise a lot of security organizations, and it's more common for me to talk to companies where security really drives. The team drives all security in the organization. Like if the security team goes away, goes on vacation, nobody's going to patch anything. They are a direct link in that chain. If there's nobody on the security team saying, "Hey, you need to do security," it's just not going to get done. And those organizations are more, at least in the anecdotal conversations that I have. My direct experience advising these firms. That's more common than not.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, this is also a way, and I wrote about this in the research, for security to show its influence across the organization. If succession planning is only being done at the C level, and security is the first team to actually say, we're doing this, we're going to build a succession planning program. We are inviting people from outside of the organization to become a part of it. Again, the thing that was missing when people are leaving, it's money, sure, during the Great Reshuffle, but a lot of folks and a lot of research is out there to say that it's the lack of a clear path for advancement that made people feel like if I'm going to go up, it has to be out. I have to go out outside of this organization. And we don't want that right now for, talent that we're trying desperately to retain because they have that institutional knowledge and because they have this very company specific skill set now. It makes sense to show people, if you want to move into the next step, here's what we're going to do for you. Here's how we're going to invest in you to get to that next step. If you're a level 1 SOC analyst right now and you want to be an incident responder, here's how much time we think it's going to take. Here's how we're going to help you get there. And here's what we need you to do as part of that plan.
That's a great point, Jess, because, succession planning can almost be like that backup plan, that insurance just in case. But on the flip side, it can be leveraged strategically as a retention tool.
That's right.
Because you're putting all of those processes in place to ensure that your staff has a roadmap, right? Has a plan to that next step. To that point, what are some best practices if an organization doesn't have a succession planning framework? Because that's what this is. This is a framework that people can bring into their organization to be able to ensure they don't have those single points of failure when someone leaves. What are some steps to start with that organizations can take to begin that journey?
Yeah, I think that, it doesn't hurt to check with your internal human resources or employee experience team to see if they may have a framework in place that's just being used for the C-suite and see what you can adapt from there. And if not, I put together 6 steps for folks if they want to check out the research. But really, you start with assessing, what are your single points of failure? What are the critical roles that right now, if that person in that role left, you don't have anyone that's ready to step in? And kind of start there. Start with your biggest vulnerabilities as an organization, and from there identify those key roles, and then start thinking about the people you have on the team that could actually fill those key roles in X amount of time. I use an example. Raytheon has a program. It's company wide, which I think is great. To your point earlier, Jason, this is not just for the security organization, but they put people in 3 different buckets. They had ready now, 1 to 2 years, and then 3 to 5 years. So they were looking way out and building a bench, of folks that maybe are at, people always say the help desk. Maybe somebody's at the help desk right now, and they're 3 to 5 years out from becoming, a key member of the security team, but there's interest there. There's curiosity. They're going to build that out and work with those managers across those different functions to get those people moved up into the 1 to 2 bucket and then into the ready now bucket. And I love that example. So it's just figuring out how to find those roles, start looking for people that are interested in those roles, and start having those conversations and building out those clear paths for advancement from there.
So I had 2 questions. I mean, you mentioned 3 to 5 years is a long time. As somebody who's been at his current employer for 36 years, that seems 3 to 5 years, they barely know where the water cooler is, and let alone any corporate knowledge. But I guess I'm on a different time scale. But my question, I mean, I know a lot of focus is on shorter term. Focus at my employer has been actually, as you're there longer, you get more and more vacation time. They're shortening the time to advances up. And I'm looking back at but the max is not any higher. I haven't gotten an increase in my vacation time in 16 years, but that's not an issue. It's weird. But my bigger question was, are there people out there who are like, I want to be a SOC 1 analyst forever. I don't really want to move. Is that okay?
That's okay as long as you have those conversations, right? As long as they know that there could be another path for them. There are people that you should. Management is not always for everybody, right? So if someone wants to remain an individual contributor, find a way to maybe to put a senior in front of their title if there's some way to do that. But if there's, if they want to stay in roughly the same position, find a path for seniority and not necessarily a path to management or something entirely different.
Yeah. And I think where folks are lacking too is, they start to get frustrated when they don't have professional development, whether or not they want to go upscale in their career or kind of just stay at that same level. It's the professional development side. Now, it's funny, Jess, as you started talking through, some of those best practices, it really reminded me of, sitting back and really doing a risk assessment, right? So humans are an asset, right? They're an asset to the organization. And typically we'll go through and we'll assess our assets, know the current state, right? See where there could be vulnerabilities or gaps, identify those, know where the crown jewels lie, and then treat it as such, right? And protect those crown jewels. So it's a very similar process. Know what you have, know your people, know where the gaps are, know where there could be vulnerability, right? Know where the crown jewels are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you find we've got the ratio of people who are looking after the team and the number of people in the team right? Or are we often skewed to, too many things to track, so there's no way in hell to pull that off? Or is that such a big problem?
I think this is one of those things that people have to make the time for. It's just like developing early career folks. Security team sizes vary so much by company size and by industry and by level of regulation and all of that. But I think if you find managers that are willing to put in the time to mentor people, whether they're just coming into the organization or they're making a move from level, into a different level of seniority or into management themselves, it's finding the folks that are not going to hoard that institutional knowledge and start, sharing and mentoring folks.
So who implements this plan? Who executes it? If the CISO isn't there, is this HR? Is it
if the CISO isn't there?
Right.
If there isn't one, or if the CISO is left?
Well, I mean, say you've got a succession plan, the CISO quits, who's implementing it? Who's carrying out this plan?
Probably whoever the CISO reports to at that point. In many cases, that might be the CIO. It definitely behooves the CIO or whoever the CISO reports to be, in the know about this and taking part in it. Hopefully, maybe rolling it out to other parts of the organization, like IT ops. Also probably some big single points of failure in groups like that as well. But yeah, and I think that the CISO, whether you want to think about leaving or not, you really do need to think about who on my team, who of my direct reports could in X number of years fill my shoes. And I've seen a lot of folks, if there's a BSO program especially, we're seeing a lot of BSO to CISO advancement now, which I absolutely love, because those folks have more of those skills to align with the business and talk to the business and the board than probably any other set of direct reports to a CISO or in that CISO organization. So think about who from that organization, if you have one, and again, that's industry specific, could fill those shoes, and think about who your deputy is now, either formally or informally, and start having those discussions, whether you think you're leaving or not.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of leadership and communication segments on this show, and one of the key leadership traits that I think a lot of leaders need to really move down that path more often is having that mentorship program, right? I mean, one of the things that I've always done is tell my direct reports, listen, my job is to teach you how to put me out of a job. Yes. Because when I do that, I'm off to my next best thing, right? Mm-hmm. And you're filling those shoes. And as leaders, I really think we need to start focusing on that more and have that be a culture, right?
Yeah.
Have your direct reports push that same culture downstream. And now organically, you're building that succession plan because you're focused on it, right? You're focused on teaching folks to take over for you when they need to.
Yeah. So the CISO of Highmark Health did that. He had a job rotation where he wasn't on vacation. He just went and did something else, and he was there if needed. But he got kicked out of his own meeting because the person who was in that rotation was like, no, you said I got this, so I'm going to do this.
Awesome.
And he said it was amazing. He said it was awesome. Yeah. And I love that example where he got kicked out of his own staff meeting and he went on and did a little project of his own that he wanted to do. And those kind of things build an incredible culture. I think that organization has an excellent culture, and he brought in somebody who was an expert in learning design to actually create not only the succession plan, but just his leadership program at Highmark Health. So really impressed.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. That's exactly it, right? And those are strategies that leaders need to take on more often, is that type of a mentality of, teach your folks to take over your role, right? And push that downstream. So Jess, is there anything we can be looking out for, right? I mean, we talked about, having a succession plan if something were to happen. We talked about leveraging these best practices as retention tools. I've read some MIT Sloan information that, the majority of folks who who left their position during the Great Resignation or reshuffle were more of those customer facing roles. Is there anything we can be queuing into so that we can put a proactive focus in certain areas? Are we seeing any trends in security teams, whether it's like SOC analysts or something like that, where they're leaving?
I'm seeing a lot of trends where people are just trying to get the latest skills. Like, cloud security has become a big thing. So you're seeing a good number of certifications kind of focused on that. I think right now we're going to see whether this recession becomes a real thing or not is really hard to tell right now. But I think we'll see a little bit of a slowdown in people wanting to make a jump until they see what's happening. So now is a good time. And we said this in a blog post not too long ago, just looking at some of the rounds of layoffs that have happened with security tech companies. Now is a time to work on this stuff with your folks, to let them know, like, you don't have to go. We really would like you to stay here and make your next career move here. And now's the time, as people are weighing their options a little more carefully and not jumping into the next move, to say, your next role can be here, and here's how we're going to do it, and have those conversations, even skip level conversations. I think are really important, that a CISO can proactively go out and do that to show people that they're valued and that they should stay.
I think that's key. I mean, I think we have a little bit of PTSD when it comes to the reshuffle that happened, right? Honestly, and I've seen so many other leaders in colleagues basically say, listen, we had employees literally give up their role, high paying role, to say, you want to know what? My family's more important. Sorry, too stressful. Goodbye. I'll go figure out my next step later. And they didn't have another role. They didn't have another position to go to, right? People leaving under those pretenses. So, I'm always looking at proactive measures or something we can make sure we're being proactive so that doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Is work-life balance something we can differentiate on?
Oh, I think so. I think so. And I think when the great reshuffle was at its height for security, we were advising companies to say, you got to work with your HR departments. And, if security has to be different, it has to be different. You can't lose these folks. If they need more flexibility, this is where you're going to have to think about making exceptions. And we even put that in our program recommendations for 2022 that treats security for what it is, which is different. Yeah. That may ruffle some feathers with other functions, but again, these are folks you really can't afford to lose right now.
Yeah. And Lee, I mean, those are the mantras that I heard consistently was work-life balance, health and well-being, family over the company. Those were all the mantras I consistently heard from other leaders and colleagues that I talked to over the course of the last couple of years. So making sure you can put a focus on that as an organization, I think, is very important.
One twist I've caught on that is, I've heard now, you get all the support for flexibility, alternate work schedules, take care of yourself, as long as you're checking your email at least once a day. And it's like, I'm like, no, you need to unplug, go take care of yourself. But I'm hearing other management forgetting that. I'm thinking, I can't be the only one hearing that. You gotta do it you gotta go in the whole way into the deep end. So.
Yeah. So, something else I wanted to, another thing that occurred to me is, the pandemic aside, some organizations do a reorg, every 16, 18 months. That can be pretty disruptive too. I worked at a large financial services organization where we worked under IT, and then we were under finance and audit, and then we were back under IT, all in the span of, just 3 or 4 years. And our leadership changed constantly during that. And some folks I've talked to told me they've had 8 CISOs in the last 6 years. And, they all have, there's just this huge pile of dead, abandoned initiatives and projects and stuff like that. Every CISO that comes in has their own style, their own way that they want to do things, their own priorities. So to some extent, should the business encourage or enforce some consistency when, that seat is revolving so quickly?
Yes, it is, in as much as they can. I think we also advise new CISOs coming in to do a lot more listening than talking in their first 100 days. And if there are projects that people feel really strongly about, it doesn't matter if the last person at the helm came up with it or said that this is a priority. If you listen and you agree that this isn't something that should be abandoned, then that's something that you should let that team continue to work on, because it's so demoralizing to have a revolving door of leadership and even a revolving door of, where the function reports to. If that's something like the business or the COO or someone can say, let's put a halt to major restructuring like that if possible, and find some consistency there, and then hopefully work on consistency of the leader.
And then another question is, more and more I'm seeing roles that are not cut and dry security. So there are CISOs who are CTOs, CISOs like Jason who are CIOs. So should this succession planning, go a bit beyond just security, and be part of a larger plan for critical roles in the organization in general?
Jason, I'd love to hear your take on this. I say yes. This is where I was coming from, is that security, leaves the firm most vulnerable, in my opinion, with roles that sit vacant for 6 to 12 months. But this should be a model that the rest of the organization goes after and incorporates into their own structure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's I think that's a leadership framework that needs to be in place 100%. I had the luxury of going from chief security officer of an organization, then becoming the CIO, being offered the CIO role, and me saying that I will never leave the CISO role, right? So the CISO role either follows me or I stay in the CISO role, because I needed to be a security-led CIO, right?
Which I think is amazing.
Yeah. So that was honestly, it was the caveat, right? I wouldn't have taken the role if it was any different, because I needed security to be front and foremost of what we did, and we needed to be secure by design. So my CEO was willing to make that move, and I reported directly to the CEO at that point, right? So now I move on to another organization. I'm chief operating officer, but I run the security practice, right? I'm a security-oriented COO. So chief operating officer, CISO, right? Because we have to be security first, must. So it's those conversations that you have to have as a leader when you're either going into a new role or you're negotiating a role, where you're saying, listen, this is my stance. This is what I'm going to take, and it's the hill I will die on. And it worked out well, right? For me.
Yeah.
So making it part of the culture is huge. You have to.
And it's funny that you mentioned succession. I actually had a job once where I was coming in to the CISO role because the existing CISO was also the CTO, and he felt like he couldn't handle both roles at that organization. And then after he brought me in, he changed his mind.
You want to know what, Adrian?
So
that's a great point. That's a great point too, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to sacrifice the security of our organization for my role or my job. And one thing I can tell you right now that I will do is that if need be, and if I notice I can't put the cycles into security, CISO's the next role, right? That will be the hiring role, because we cannot allow that to fail, right? We can't allow that to go stagnant. And it's just one of those personal things that I have. It's, that if that were to happen, and I notice that happening, we have to go get a CISO right away.
So Jess, what other interesting, like you mentioned the CISO getting kicked out of his own, or, his former meeting, I guess, have you run across any other interesting anecdotes and insights as you went through putting together this report?
Yeah, only in that people, I don't think, realize how much that if they have had someone who's stayed with an organization for such a long period of time, how much their job description couldn't possibly match one that you would put out there, in the public. And this is where I'm doing some additional research. Just it made me think on sort of the state of security certifications, right? And there's some interesting data that we've uncovered through a sentiment analysis and an analysis of job postings, where there's a lot of requirements that are completely out of scope for compensation and level of seniority that you're looking for. So when you're going through these succession planning exercises, you need to sometimes maybe take one person's role apart and think about, if you got an internal pipeline, or if you're looking for an early career pipeline, is this 2? Is this 3? should this person leave, and should you actually be preparing to have 2 or 3 people take on this role because that person's been there for 15 or so years. And I heard that from a couple of different CISOs who said this person is a single point of failure, and it's going to take 3 people to replace her, or him. And so that's something that made me think about what should job descriptions look like? What should, early career candidates look like? And it can't necessarily be the person that you have in the role right now.
So pulling that, it takes N people to replace this person. At one point, should you be pulling in those extra ends before they leave? I mean, it seems like you've identified there's more than one person's work being done there. Shouldn't you be proactive? Or is that crazy?
Yeah, you should be proactive. And sometimes I don't think people realize it until they start to go through these exercises, right? This person is this individual contributor who's just this rock star who everybody has come to rely on. And then they don't, maybe they have hoarded institutional knowledge. Maybe they have just been doing it because they know how to, and it's rote to them. So usually it's not for lack of, it is for lack of attention. It's just because they haven't really seen how much work that one person is doing until they go through an exercise like this.
Yeah, and I'll say there's lots of proactive methods to do that too. We have a rock star HR leader who has the leadership team periodically on a cadence go through and update every single work role and the job descriptions related to it. So that allows you to go through and actually update current state of job descriptions and role, the accountability of the role and responsibilities of the role. So that forces us to take a look on a cadence to say, wow, this person does the job of 3, right? Yeah. So we can identify that. But it's a cadence you have to go through, right? Where you're updating job descriptions and work roles.
Yeah, I personally went through this with my first big career role. I was there for 8 years, and I think I was security employee number 3. In the beginning. And, it's just how things grow. Like back in those days, a lot of positions weren't even formalized. But before I left, that was one of the things that led to me leaving is I, put together a spreadsheet that basically listed everything I did. And then I kind of separated everything out and realized, if I were able to do this properly, which I couldn't, like I was doing a mediocre job of 5 different FTEs. I realized these guys, the culture here, they like to run lean. They're not going to staff this properly. They're not going to staff these roles properly unless I leave. They're more than happy to let me continue doing a mediocre job at five people's jobs. And sure enough, I leave, and the moment I leave, they put 2 people in my place, and then a month later hire a 3rd. And it was just, it just occurred to me, I had to leave. Like it was the best thing for both me and them. So another thing, speaking of being in a position for a long time, there's a tech company, that had a CISO for about 20 years. Not going to say who it is. If you know, but he recently left, and the new CISO came in, very different culture, and a bunch of other people left. So I imagine that's something you want to take into account with the succession plan too, is, some kind of cascading, I've seen this many times, not just with CISOs, but there's a particular personality, that attracts people to a company, to a job. And when that person leaves, so does a lot of the reason that the other people came to that company and were working there. So you kind of have this fall-on effect, after one person leaves, within a couple of months, 5 or 6 other people do as well.
Yeah, I mean, that should be accounted as sort of a risk assessment, and thinking about who do we have in place should the top lieutenants of that particular leader want to go and eventually follow within 6 months of the leader leaving. That's something that should be thought about when you're thinking about those critical roles, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today in Business Security Weekly, Jess.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we've got a few exciting interviews from this year's RSA conference, one with Dave DeWalt and another with the Craig of Craigslist.